Good evening, and welcome back to Aislin's Enchanted Path. Tonight we're talking about something both practical and deeply personal, and that's stocking your magical cabinet. Whether you're new to the path or have been practicing for years, deciding what tools and items to include in your spiritual space is an important part of shaping your craft. That's my cat. Ignore him. So, your magical cabinet, or your altar cabinet, or your witchy shelf, or even just that one box under your bed, whatever you use, is yours and yours alone. It's not about copying someone else's setup or buying every item off a checklist. It's about gathering the tools that resonate with your spirit and support your magical goals. Tonight's video is the first of two parts. In this particular video, we'll focus on tools, supplies, and altar items, the tangible things you might choose to include in your cabinet. We'll explore what each item is, why you might want to use it, and why you might decide not to. So let's begin. One of the first things I often encourage people to get is an altar cloth. These are pieces of fabric placed beneath your ritual tools. They can be seasonal, color-coded, embroidered, or just plain. Some witches use them to define sacred space or to protect furniture. Others don't bother with them at all, and that is okay. Now, you might include these to add visual and energetic focus to your altar, but you also might choose to skip them if you don't really need decorative items to connect with your magic and you don't have a surface to protect. The next thing might be a black mirror. Now, this is a tool for scrying. This is a form of divination where you gaze into a dark and reflective surface to receive visions or insight. You might include it if you practice scrying or shadow work, as the black mirror can be very powerful. But if divination isn't your thing, or you prefer tarot or pendulums, a black mirror might just gather dust. Don't invest money in tools you're not going to use. So, the bolline. This is a white-handled knife traditionally used for cutting herbs, cords, or magical materials. Unlike the athame, which is usually symbolic and not used to cut, the bolline is practical. It's used for basically slicing up the things you're going to use in your magical practice. You might include it if you do a lot of herbal work or not magic and you're going to be cutting things frequently, so you want a special tool to do just that. But it's not necessary if your craft isn't really hands-on and you're not going to be cutting things very often. So it's okay to kind of not include a bolline and just use something around the house to cut when you need it. I would only get one if you're going to use it frequently. Otherwise, it's just going to take up space. So, candle holders. If you work with candles, safety first. So, having candle holders, sturdy holders that don't fall over, is a must. They can also elevate the aesthetics of your rituals. You can include them to prevent wax spills, fire hazard, accidents. These are necessary if you use candles. But if you only use jar candles or LEDs because you don't like actual open flame, then you probably don't need a selection of candle holders at all. So what about charcoal? I like the self-igniting kind. It's the easiest. This is used to burn loose incense or powdered herbs during rituals. Self-igniting charcoal discs light quickly and stay hot and are quite good for a variety of purposes. They're ideal for incense blends and old-school herbal offerings. But if you're not going to do any of the things that use charcoal discs, then you don't need them at all. You might prefer stick or cone incense, or you might not work with anything that you burn at all. That's your choice, your practice, your choice. So if that's your decision, then you probably don't need the charcoal, even self-igniting. It's probably just going to sit around and be wasted. Now, a drum is a little bit controversial because a lot of people simply don't use them, but they are used to raise energy, especially in circle work or ecstatic ritual. Even a small hand drum can bring power and rhythm to your practice. For movement-based or sound-based rituals, these are essential. However, if you don't connect to sound magic and you prefer silence or recorded music, or you're simply never going to use a drum, then there's no point. Drums can be expensive. Don't get one if you're not going to use it. So incense and an incense burner, these are really, really common items. The incense itself is used to cleanse, to shift energy, to represent the element of air. Burners keep it safe and contained. Used together, they can really enhance your work. They're perfect for setting the mood and the intention. But if you have smoke sensitivity, you share a space with someone who has smoke sensitivity, or you just don't like incense, then you're not going to need incense and a burner. So again, if you're not going to use it, don't buy it. So lamps of art. You hear this term, not everyone knows what they are. These are often symbolic lamps, oil lamps, lanterns, large candle holders. These represent inner light, inspiration, and divine flame. These are useful for ceremonial lighting or symbolic meaning. But if you're not using them ceremonially, then you probably don't need them. Okay? You might not need symbolism that specific. I like having a nice pair of lamps. Not everyone even bothers. I like them for the aesthetic. Some people don't like the aesthetic and they don't see a practical reason for them. If you have no practical reason for them and you don't like the way they look, skip them. That's part of the beauty. So matches or a lighter. If you work with candles, you need some way to light them. You'll need one or the other if you're working with candles and charcoal. Obviously, they're practical. However, some people prefer an electric lighter. That's kind of the way I've moved. I really do like my electric lighter. So I've moved into that frame. And if you never use open flame, you don't need anything at all. So if you use something like a candle, you need some way to light it. All right? If you don't, then you don't need anything. Mortar and pestle. Well, mortar and pestle are used for grinding herbs, resins, or salts. These are great for creating incense blends and spell powders and herbal teas. They're perfect for hands-on witches who love making their own blends. However, what if you're not into any of that? If you buy pre-made ingredients, or you don't like mixing your own, or you simply don't work with herbs and resins and salts at all, then maybe you don't need one. Again, don't waste your money on tools you're not going to use. Next, we come to offering dishes, sometimes called a libation dish. It depends on your practice. This is a small bowl or plate for offering food, drink, and herbs, or other items to the spirits, the deities, nature. This is a place to place your offerings. Why would you use it? Well, if you work with a lot of offerings or ancestral veneration, you might want a libation dish, an offering dish, in order to make that offering. However, if you don't make offerings at all, that's valid. You don't have to make offerings. It's not a necessary part of any practice. So you can certainly skip an offering dish. And if you only make the occasional offering, you probably don't need a specific dish at all for that. Parchment, and sometimes what they call a pen of art. This is used for writing spells, petitions, ritual scripts. Your pen of art can be any pen dedicated to magical use. This is great for written spells, sigils, journaling. Most people are going to want a specific pen. However, if you work mostly verbally or mentally and you don't write things down, you might not need to. That's valid too. Ritual jewelry. Well, these are things like rings and necklaces or bracelets you only wear during magical work. You remove them when you're not working a magical work. They can include enchanted or symbolic symbols. Symbolic symbols is kind of, don't need to say both of those, but you know what I meant. So they can include a lot of different things. You might have a specific crown you wear when you work magic, or specific pentacle. That's up to you. If you really love jewelry, magical jewelry is a really good way to kind of get in the headspace of practicing magic. If you're not into that, if you find it distracting or unnecessary, or you just don't like jewelry, then magical jewelry might not be up your alley. That's okay too. How about a set of runes? I'm often asked, do I need a set of runes? Well, if you want a set. These are used for divination or carving magical symbols into candles or wood, depending on what you have and what style. A rune set is a powerful but specific tool. If you study Norse magic, or you want to learn a divination system you haven't studied already, this might be something to include. However, you might want to skip them if you use other methods or you don't like runes. Not everyone likes runes. That's fine. You don't have to. Little scraps of wood. I have so many little scraps of wood, and I use them all the time. These could be saved for wand making or ritual fires, or they can be carved with symbols and used in spells. I use them because they're useful in crafting or symbolic magic. Okay, that's typically what I use them for. But not every witch will use them. So I use them a lot, which is why they're included in my list. But if you're not going to use them, then you probably don't need them at all. Skip them if you don't need them. Seashells, something else I have a lot of. These represent the element of water and the energy of the ocean. They're often used in water altars or lunar work. You might include them because they're beautiful, symbolic, and grounding, or because you find them useful. But if water isn't your element, if you don't love the look of seashells, or you just don't find them practical, you don't need them. Small bags or pouches. Again, I have so many. These I use all the time. They're used to hold crystals and herbs and charms, spell ingredients. You might put together a small spell kit that you can grab and use really quick without having to go through your items. If you have a certain type of spell you cast a lot of, you might want to have pre-done spell kits that you can just grab and go. So they work really well for that. They're super versatile and portable. But if you do most of your magic quietly at home, you don't need to take anything anywhere, and you don't mind going through your stuff so you don't have to pre-sort anything, you might not need them. So if you don't need them, don't buy them. How about some small bowls? Well, small bowls are incredibly useful. They're handy for salt and water and herbs and crystals, whatever you're working with. You might include them because they're simple and flexible and they're easy to use. However, you might skip them if you have nothing to put in them. You don't need an empty bowl sitting on your altar. So if you have nothing to put in them and you're very minimalist and you're never going to have anything to put in them, you probably don't need a small set of bowls. What about a staff? Now, I have a beautiful tiger staff that was gifted to me. These are a rather large magical tool, often symbolizing power, direction, earth energy. Some use it like a ceremonial wand. Some use it only in coven work. It's up to you. These are great for outdoor rituals or for casting very large circles. If they're too large or unnecessary, though, for you, you don't really need one. If you don't like using one, or if you practice primarily indoors, they can be impractical. Why do I use one? I love my tiger staff and I do a lot of work outdoors. So for me, it's an essential tool. For you, it may not be. What about, there's something called a stang. Now this is a forked staff or symbolic representation of the horned god. I'm going to say most people don't use one. I don't use one. I had one at one point. I rarely used it, so I didn't replace it when someone asked to borrow it and didn't bring it back. This can also serve as kind of a ritual focal point and a way to represent the god in your circle. It's a deeply, deeply traditional tool rooted in witchcraft, but most people don't use one because there's not a lot of use for them these days. If you don't work with deity or don't connect to that symbol, or you're just going to leave it in your closet for a year, maybe skip it. How about the sword? I do have one. A ceremonial tool representing air or fire is the sword. Okay, air or fire, depending on the tradition. Different traditions do it differently. But I love these. They're used for casting circles or cutting energetic ties. If your practice calls for really bold ritual work, or you work in a large group, large outdoor areas, you might find that a sword is really useful. But they're impractical in small spaces, so if you primarily practice inside in your bedroom, a sword might not be too useful. So, what about tarot cards or other divining tools? I am a big fan of tarot cards, obviously. I have probably 120 decks, somewhere in there. So these are used for insight, guidance, and spiritual communication. You don't have to go with tarot. You can pick another divination style. Divination is one of the most common magical practices, so most witches have some kind of divinatory tool, It might not be tarot. Maybe you prefer oracle cards, or maybe you prefer runes, whatever. It doesn't matter. Whatever you prefer, you should have it. But if you don't do any type of divination, if you never perform divination, you probably don't need it. So again, don't buy something you're not going to use. Maybe buy one tarot deck and see if you like it. But I wouldn't go all in and buy 3 unless you're sure you're going to use them. Now, that's just a very basic list. Before you go out and buy everything, pause. You do not need to have every item I've mentioned. I hope I've been clear about that. You do not need to spend a fortune. You do not need to justify what's missing from your cabinet. Instead, think of it as a menu, a buffet of magical choices. Choose what feels right and leave behind what doesn't. You can always add, remove, or swap out tools as your practice grows. There's nothing wrong with abandoning something or adding something new. Your magical cabinet should be a reflection of you, your beliefs, your path, and your power. In the next video, which will come out next week, we'll explore the more symbolic side of stocking your cabinet. Herbs and oils and crystals and candles, so stay tuned for that one. But this is just a very basic list of tools you might want to consider adding to your magical cabinet. Again, if one doesn't resonate with you, don't bother. That's all for tonight, beautiful souls. Until next time, blessed be.